What would you do if you stopped two young girls driving alone in the middle of the night, only to uncover a shocking truth that changes everything? This story will keep you on the edge of your seat. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? We love hearing from you. Officer James Langston was known throughout the city for his sharp instincts and calm demeanor. A veteran of the force in his mid-40s, he had spent years patrolling neighborhoods, responding to calls, and ensuring safety in his community. On this quiet evening, the streets were bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, and the usual sounds of distant traffic and occasional chatter filled the air. It seemed like just another uneventful shift. Driving his patrol car down a suburban road, James noticed an older, beat-up sedan a few blocks ahead. The car swerved slightly, not enough to immediately signal danger but enough to catch his attention. Something about the vehicle didn't sit right. Was the driver distracted? Or worse, impaired? As he drew closer, James peered through the windshield. To his surprise, the driver appeared unusually small, almost as if a child was behind the wheel. His brows furrowed. This wasn't just odd, it was illegal and potentially dangerous. He flipped on his patrol lights, signaling the car to pull over. The sedan hesitated for a moment, swaying slightly, before jerking to a stop at the side of the road. As James approached the vehicle, his hand instinctively rested on his utility belt, not out of fear but out of years of training. He leaned down to the driver's side window and tapped on the glass. It rolled down slowly, revealing a nervous young girl. She couldn't have been older than 14. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white, and her wide eyes darted between James and her passenger, another girl of the same age, identical in appearance. Twins. "Good evening," James began, his voice steady and calm. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" The girl behind the wheel hesitated, her lips trembling. "And no, sir," she stammered. James glanced into the car. It was cluttered with bags, blankets, and items that looked like they'd been hastily packed. A stuffed animal peeked out from the top of one bag, and an open box of crackers sat on the center console. These weren't just kids taking a joyride, they were running from something. "Do you have a driver's license?" James asked gently, though he already knew the answer. The girl shook her head, gripping the wheel tighter. Her twin in the passenger seat turned her face away, wiping at her eyes. Something was very wrong. "All right," James said, stepping back slightly to give them space. "Can you tell me where your parents are?" The driver's face crumpled, and she exchanged a nervous glance with her sister. After a long pause, she finally whispered, "We don't have parents." James felt a pang in his chest. He crouched slightly to meet their eyes on their level. "Then where are you headed?" "To somewhere safe," the passenger said quietly, her voice barely audible. Her shoulders shook as she tried to hold back tears. "Safe from what?" James pressed, keeping his tone soft but firm. The driver hesitated, her breathing uneven. "From them," she finally said, her voice cracking. James's instincts sharpened. "Who's them?" he asked, leaning closer. "The people who took us," the passenger blurted out, her voice breaking into sobs. "They're looking for us. They said they'd find us no matter where we go." James's stomach dropped. The pieces began to fall into place. These girls weren't just scared, they were victims. Likely of trafficking, a horrific reality he had encountered before but never so directly. He stood up, his mind racing. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "I promise, no one's going to hurt you." The driver looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't let them take us back," she begged. James placed a reassuring hand on the edge of the door. "I won't," he said, his voice resolute. "But I need you to stay here while I call for help." As he returned to his patrol car, James felt a surge of urgency. He radioed for backup, his voice steady but filled with an unmistakable edge. "This is Officer Langston. I need immediate assistance. Possible trafficking victims. 2 juveniles. Send backup and secure the area. As the radio crackled with confirmation, James looked back at the twins. They were huddled together, clutching each other as though their lives depended on it. And in that moment, James made a silent vow: whatever danger was out there, he would protect them. Officer James Langston stood by his patrol car, the cool night air brushing against his face as he watched the 2 girls through the windshield of their beaten-up sedan. They huddled close, whispering to one another, their fear palpable even from a distance. James's radio crackled with updates. Backup was on its way, but every second felt like an eternity. Returning to the car, James approached the driver's side again, his flashlight in hand. "Okay," he said gently, crouching slightly to meet their eyes. "We're going to figure this out. But I need you both to trust me and tell me exactly what's going on." The driver, still gripping the steering wheel, hesitated. Her hands shook, and her voice wavered when she finally spoke. We escaped," she said. "From the people who took us. They said they'd never stop looking for us." "Escaped?" James asked, keeping his voice calm despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. "Who are these people? Can you tell me their names?" The passenger, her twin, interjected, her voice cracking with desperation. "We don't know their real names. They called each other numbers. Like 5 or 7. She buried her face in her hands. They hurt people. They hurt us." James clenched his jaw, struggling to maintain his composure. He'd handled trafficking cases before, but hearing it directly from these 2 terrified girls was gut-wrenching. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "But I need you to tell me everything you can remember. How did you get away?" The driver glanced at her sister, then back at James. "They moved us to a house," she said, her words coming out in halting bursts. "It wasn't like the other places. There weren't as many people. We waited until everyone was asleep, and we just ran." The passenger nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't know where to go. We found this car behind the house and the keys were in it. So we took it. We thought we could find somewhere safe, but we don't know anyone." James's heart ached for them. They were just kids, thrust into an unimaginable nightmare and forced to fend for themselves. "You made the right choice," he said, his voice steady. "You got out, and now we're going to make sure they can't hurt you, or anyone else, ever again." James stepped away from the car, his mind racing. If the girls were right and their captors were actively searching for them, then time was of the essence. He picked up his radio. "This is Officer Langston," he said, his voice firm. "I need the entire street locked down immediately. We've got potential traffickers in the area. Notify all units to be on alert for suspicious activity." "Copy that," came the response. Within minutes, patrol cars began arriving, their lights flashing in the distance. Officers set up roadblocks at either end of the street, ensuring no one could come or go unnoticed. James's eyes scanned the area, hyper-aware of every movement. Returning to the girls, James noticed something he hadn't seen before. The passenger's wrist bore faint bruises, and the driver had a small cut on her lip. His heart sank further. "Are either of you hurt?" he asked, his tone softer now. The passenger shook her head, though she winced as she adjusted her position. "We're okay," she whispered. We're tired." "How long have you been running?" James asked. The driver bit her lip, thinking. "Since last night. We've been driving all night." James nodded, trying to hide the anger boiling inside him. Whoever had done this to them had to be caught, and soon. James's radio crackled again. "Officer Langston, we've got a suspicious vehicle reported near your location. Matches the description of a car involved in trafficking cases. 2 males inside. Approaching from the north." James's stomach tightened. Do not let them reach this street, he ordered. Stop them before they get anywhere near these girls. As the officers moved to intercept the suspicious vehicle, James turned back to the twins. I need you both to stay in my patrol car, he said firmly. Lock the doors and don't open them for anyone except me. The girls nodded, their faces pale but trusting. James escorted them to his car, making sure they were safely inside before stepping away to prepare for what might come next. Standing near his patrol car, James looked back at the twins. Despite everything they had been through, there was a flicker of hope in their eyes, a belief that maybe, just maybe, they were finally safe. I'll protect you, James whispered to himself, tightening his grip on his radio. No matter what it takes. The street was now a flurry of activity. Patrol cars were stationed at every entry point, their flashing lights illuminating the quiet neighborhood. Officer James Langston stood beside his patrol car, keeping a watchful eye on the two girls inside. They sat huddled together, their frightened faces peeking out from the slightly fogged-up window. James's radio crackled to life. Officer Langston, the suspicious vehicle has been intercepted near the northern roadblock. 2 adult males inside. Backup units are engaging. James's chest tightened. Do we have an ID on them? He asked, gripping the radio. Not yet, the dispatcher replied. But they fit the description provided by the girls. Both men are refusing to cooperate. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, officers surrounded the suspicious vehicle. The men inside, both in their late 30s, were agitated and aggressive, yelling at the officers to back off. Detective Laura Grant, who had arrived to assist, approached the car cautiously. She held up her badge, her voice calm but authoritative. Gentlemen, step out of the vehicle and keep your hands where I can see them. One of the men smirked, crossing his arms. You've got nothing on us, he sneered. We're just passing through. Laura's sharp eyes caught a stack of papers on the dashboard, partially covered. She signaled to one of the officers to retrieve them. As the papers were brought over, Laura's stomach churned. Among them were photographs of the twins, hastily printed and marked with notes like, last seen, and target. That's enough, Laura said, her voice cold. Cuff them both. James was pacing near his car when Laura's voice came through his radio. Langston, we've got them. Photos of the girls were in their car. These are definitely our guys. James exhaled a shaky breath, his mind racing. He looked at the twins, who were still trembling in the back seat. Approaching the car, he knelt by the window and tapped lightly. They've been caught, he said gently, his voice steady. They can't hurt you anymore. The passenger began to cry, her small frame shaking as she leaned into her sister for comfort. The driver, though still visibly tense, managed a weak nod. Are you sure? She whispered. I'm sure, James said firmly. They're in custody, and we're going to make sure they pay for what they've done. As the suspects were transported to the station, Laura called James directly. The evidence we found in their car suggests they weren't working alone, she said. This operation is bigger than we thought. The girls might have more information we can use. James glanced at the twins. They had already endured so much, and the thought of pressing them for more details made his heart ache. But he knew Laura was right, every piece of information could help dismantle this operation. After a few moments of contemplation, James opened the door to his patrol car and crouched down to their level. Girls, I know you've been through a lot, he began, his tone soft. But we need your help. Anything you can tell us about these men, where they took you, what they said, could help us stop them for good. The driver bit her lip, her eyes darting nervously to her sister. They kept us in a house, she said hesitantly. It was near a train yard. There were other kids there, too. But we didn't know their names. Everyone was too scared to talk. The passenger nodded, adding, they moved us at night. Always in different cars. And they used numbers instead of names, like 4 and 7. James nodded, absorbing every word. Do you remember anything about the house? What it looked like, the street it was on? The driver hesitated, then said, it had a red door. And there was a big sign nearby, something about freight or cargo. I think it was a warehouse. James relayed the information to Laura, who immediately dispatched units to investigate the area near the train yard. The description of the house matched an abandoned property that had been flagged in a previous trafficking investigation but never searched due to lack of evidence. This could be it, Laura said. We might be able to find more victims, or at least more evidence to take this operation down. As the search teams mobilized, James stayed with the twins, offering them reassurance. You've been so brave, he said. Because of you, we're one step closer to stopping these people. The driver finally managed a small smile, though her eyes still brimmed with tears. We just want this to be over, she said. It will be, James promised. I'll make sure of it. In the distance, the wail of approaching sirens signaled the arrival of more officers. The night wasn't over, but for the first time, James felt a flicker of hope. The information provided by the twins had set the wheels of justice in motion. The mention of the red door near a train yard led detectives to a suspected location, an abandoned house on the outskirts of town, tucked away near an old industrial freight yard. The house had been flagged in the past but never thoroughly investigated due to insufficient evidence. Now, it was their prime target. Detective Laura Grant led the charge, coordinating with Officer James Langston and a tactical team to secure the site. As the convoy of police vehicles approached the area, the mood inside the cars was tense. Everyone understood the stakes, lives could still be at risk. The house was barely visible from the main road, hidden by overgrown bushes and surrounded by the eerie quiet of the industrial zone. The building looked like it had been abandoned for years, with boarded-up windows and peeling paint. But as the officers approached, subtle signs of activity became apparent, a faint light flickering through a gap in the boards and tire tracks leading up to the driveway. James parked his car a safe distance away, keeping the twins out of harm's way. Stay here, he told them firmly, meeting their worried eyes. I'll be right back. You're safe now. He joined Laura and the tactical team, who were reviewing the plan. We'll breach the front and back simultaneously, Laura instructed. If anyone's inside, we need to secure them quickly and ensure no one escapes. The team moved in silently, their steps muffled by the soft crunch of gravel. 2 officers positioned themselves at the front door while another team circled to the back. Laura signaled to James, and with a sharp nod, the breach began. The front door burst open with a resounding crack as officers stormed inside, weapons drawn. Police! Show your hands, they shouted, their voices echoing through the dimly lit house. The interior was a stark contrast to the exterior. While the house looked abandoned from the outside, the inside showed signs of recent use. Folding chairs and sleeping bags were scattered across the floor, along with discarded food containers and makeshift furniture. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something metallic, blood. As the team swept through the rooms, they found signs of the horrific operation that had taken place there. Chains and restraints were bolted to the walls in one room, and in another, a pile of documents and passports lay on a table, all with forged identities. James and Laura moved cautiously through the house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. In one of the back rooms, they found a small group of children huddled together, their faces pale and gaunt. They flinched as the officers entered, their eyes wide with fear. It's okay, Laura said gently, lowering her weapon. We're here to help you. You're safe now. The children hesitated, their mistrust evident, but eventually, one of them, a boy no older than 10, stepped forward. Are you taking us back to them? He asked, his voice trembling. No, James said firmly, crouching to meet the boy's gaze. We're here to get you away from them. No one will hurt you again. Laura quickly radioed for medical assistance while other officers began escorting the children out of the house. James couldn't help but think of the twins as he watched the frightened faces of the rescued children. They had been through the same nightmare, and yet they had found the courage to escape. As the team continued their search, they found two men hiding in a basement room. One was armed but surrendered quickly when he realized he was outnumbered. The other was unarmed but defiant, sneering at the officers as they handcuffed him. "You think this ends here?" the unarmed man spat at Laura as she read him his rights. "You'll never stop all of us." Laura didn't flinch. "We'll stop as many as it takes," she said coldly. "And you're not going anywhere." James helped escort the men to the waiting patrol cars, his grip firm on one of their arms. "You'll pay for what you've done," he said, his voice low and filled with restrained anger. Back at his patrol car, James returned to the twins, who were anxiously watching the scene unfold from the back seat. When they saw him approach, the passenger rolled down the window. "Did you find anyone?" she asked, her voice shaking. James nodded. "We found some kids. They're safe now, just like you." The twins exchanged a look, their expressions a mixture of relief and guilt. "We're glad they're safe," the driver said softly. "But, are they going to come after us?" "No," James said firmly. "The people who hurt you are in custody, and we're building a case to take down the rest of their operation. You're safe now. I promise." As night turned into morning, the house was thoroughly searched, and the evidence gathered was overwhelming. Laura called James over as she reviewed some of the documents found on the table. "This is big," she said. "They've been operating out of multiple locations. If we move fast, we can shut them down completely." James nodded, his thoughts already turning to the twins and how this discovery could help them heal. For the first time that night, he felt a glimmer of hope, not just for the girls but for every victim who had suffered at the hands of this network. As he walked back to his car, the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the quiet street. James looked at the twins, who had finally fallen asleep, their faces relaxed for the first time since he'd met them. "We'll get through this," he whispered, as much to himself as to them. The early morning light cast a soft glow over the street as officers wrapped up the search of the abandoned house. Evidence bags were being loaded into police vehicles, and the rescued children were receiving medical attention. Yet, for Officer James Langston, the work was far from over. He stood by his patrol car, watching the twins as they slept, their faces finally free of the fear that had gripped them for so long. Detective Laura Grant approached, holding a folder filled with documents recovered from the house. "James, we need to talk," she said, her tone urgent. James glanced at the twins before stepping away to speak with her. "What did you find?" Laura opened the folder, revealing a series of photographs, hand-drawn maps, and handwritten notes. "This isn't just one location," she explained. "These traffickers were part of a much larger operation. We've identified at least 3 other properties linked to the same group." James's jaw tightened as he scanned the maps. "And the people we arrested tonight, what are they saying?" "Not much," Laura admitted. "One of them is cooperating, but the other refuses to talk. The documents suggest they were planning to move more children within the next few days." James felt a surge of anger. "So, this isn't over?" "No," Laura said, her voice firm. "But the evidence we've gathered tonight gives us a fighting chance to stop them. We need to move quickly before they realize we've found this place." As James processed the information, he couldn't shake the feeling that the twins might know more than they had shared. Their detailed description of the red door and the warehouse sign had already led them to this breakthrough. What else might they remember? He returned to the patrol car and gently knocked on the window. The driver stirred, blinking sleepily as she sat up. Her sister remained curled up against her, still asleep. "I'm sorry to wake you," James said softly. "But I need to ask you a few more questions. Are you up for it?" The girl hesitated, then nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James crouched by the open door, his tone gentle but direct. You've already helped us so much, but we think there are more places like this one. Anything else you remember, anything at all, could help us find them." The girl rubbed her eyes, trying to focus. "There was another house," she said slowly. "It was in a neighborhood. Not like this one. There were kids there, too, but I don't know where it was. Do you remember anything about it?" James pressed. "What it looked like, or what was nearby?" She closed her eyes, as if searching her memory. "There was a park," she said finally. "I remember seeing swings through the window. And a church. I think it had a red roof." James nodded, filing away the details. "That's really helpful. Do you remember anything else?" The girl shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry. I wish I could remember more." "You've done more than enough," James assured her. "You're helping us stop these people. That's what matters." James relayed the information to Laura, who immediately began cross-referencing it with the documents they had recovered. Within minutes, her team identified a neighborhood that matched the description, a quiet residential area with a small park and a church with a red roof. "This could be it," Laura said. "If they're still operating there, we need to act fast." James nodded. "Let's make it happen." Before leaving, James took a moment to speak with both girls. The passenger had woken up by now, and the two sat close together, their hands tightly clasped. "We're heading to another location," James told them. "But I want you to know, you're safe now. No one is going to hurt you again." The driver looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if they come after us?" "They won't," James said firmly. "We've already arrested some of them, and we're working to stop the rest. You're under our protection now." The girls nodded, their fear easing slightly. "Thank you," the passenger said softly, "for believing us." As the team prepared to leave, James watched the twins from a distance. Despite everything they had endured, they had shown remarkable strength and courage. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility for them, not just as a police officer, but as someone who cared deeply about their future. "Let's finish this," he said to Laura as they climbed into their respective vehicles. The convoy of police cars rolled out, their mission clear, to dismantle the operation and ensure no other child would have to endure what these girls had faced. The convoy of police vehicles moved swiftly through the streets as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky. Officer James Langston drove at the head of the team, his thoughts racing. The description the twins had given, a house near a park and a church with a red roof, had led them to a small residential neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Every detail matched. Detective Laura Grant's voice crackled over the radio. "James, we've got surveillance on the location. There's activity inside. We need to act quickly, but carefully." James's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Understood," he replied. "Let's make sure no one gets hurt, especially the kids." The house was unassuming, nestled among other modest homes with neatly trimmed lawns. It blended in perfectly, which James realized was part of the traffickers' strategy. A park with swings sat across the street, and the church with the red roof was visible just a block away. Officers parked a safe distance away, setting up a perimeter to ensure no one could escape. The tactical team prepared for entry, their movements precise and silent. James and Laura joined them near the lead vehicle, reviewing the plan one last time. "We breach simultaneously," Laura said. "Front and back. Langston, you're with me at the front. Keep your eyes open, this could turn dangerous fast." James nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Let's do it." At Laura's signal, the team moved into position. Officers at the back door waited for their cue as James and Laura approached the front. The quiet neighborhood was momentarily shattered by the loud crack of the front door being kicked open. "Police!" Laura shouted as they stormed inside. "Show your hands." The interior of the house was eerily similar to the one they had raided earlier. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and mildew. In the living room, two men leapt to their feet, their faces a mix of shock and fury. One reached for something under a couch, a weapon, James assumed. "Don't move." James barked, his weapon trained on the man. "Hands where I can see them." The man hesitated but ultimately raised his hands, realizing he was outnumbered. The second man bolted toward the back of the house, but officers stationed there quickly apprehended him. As Laura and James secured the suspects, another team swept through the house. In a locked bedroom, they found a group of children, four in total, ranging in age from 8 to 14. The children were huddled together, their faces pale and gaunt. When the door opened, they flinched, their eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," an officer said gently, lowering his weapon. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." One of the children, a boy of about 10, stepped forward cautiously. "Are you really the police?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Yes," James said, stepping into the room. He knelt down to meet the boy's gaze. "We're here to help you. You're safe now." The boy looked at the others, then back at James. "Thank you," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. As the children were escorted out to waiting ambulances, officers continued to search the house. In the basement, they found a locked storage room containing piles of evidence, forged identification documents, financial ledgers, and photographs of the children, including the twins James had rescued earlier. Laura held up one of the ledgers, her face grim. "This is exactly what we need," she said. "This could dismantle their entire network." James scanned the photos, his stomach turning. The traffickers had meticulously documented their victims, treating them as commodities rather than human beings. It was sickening. As the house was cleared, James returned to the front yard, where the suspects were being loaded into patrol cars. One of the men, the one who had reached for the weapon, glared at James as he was handcuffed. "You think you've won?" the man spat. "You don't know how deep this goes. You'll never stop all of us." James stepped closer, his voice calm but ice-cold. "We'll stop as many as it takes. Starting with you." The man smirked but said nothing more as he was shoved into the back of a squad car. James walked over to the ambulances, where the rescued children were being treated by paramedics. He recognized the fear in their eyes, the same fear he'd seen in the twins. "You're safe now," he told them. "No one's going to hurt you again." One of the younger children, a girl clutching a tattered teddy bear, looked up at him. "Can we go home?" she asked softly. James knelt beside her. "We're going to find your family," he promised. "And until then, we'll take care of you." Before leaving the scene, James stepped aside and called the safe house where the twins were staying. When the driver answered the phone, her voice was filled with worry. "Did you find anyone?" she asked. "We did," James said. 4 kids. They're safe now, thanks to you." There was a pause, and then the girl said, "I'm glad. I hope they don't have to go through what we did." "They won't," James assured her. "You helped stop this. You should be proud of yourselves." As the operation wrapped up, James looked back at the house, now surrounded by police tape and flashing lights. The traffickers were in custody, the children were safe, and they had enough evidence to dismantle a significant part of the network. But James knew the fight wasn't over. Walking back to his patrol car, he thought of the twins and the promise he'd made to them. "We're not done yet," he murmured to himself. "But we're one step closer." The next day, Officer James Langston arrived at the precinct early, feeling a mix of exhaustion and determination. The previous night's operation had been a significant breakthrough, but it was only the tip of the iceberg. The evidence recovered from the house was now in the hands of Detective Laura Grant and her team, who were working tirelessly to connect the dots and dismantle the trafficking network. As James entered the evidence room, Laura was already there, surrounded by files, photographs, and maps spread out across a large table. "Morning, Langston," she said without looking up. "We've got a lot to go through." Laura handed James a stack of documents. "The ledgers we found are detailed. They list names, locations, transactions, everything. These people weren't just local, this is a multi-state operation." James scanned the papers, his stomach tightening as he read the cold, clinical entries, initials of victims, dates, and dollar amounts. "This is sick," he muttered. "But it's enough to take them down." Laura nodded. "We've already identified several locations tied to this network. 2 are warehouses in neighboring states, and 1 is another residential property in the city. If we move fast, we can shut them all down before they relocate." James hesitated, then asked, "What about the twins? Do you think they might know more about these locations?" Laura looked thoughtful. "They've already been through so much, but if they're willing to talk, their insights could be invaluable. They've seen this operation from the inside." James nodded. "I'll talk to them. They trust me." Later that day, James drove to the safe house where the twins were staying. The secure, quiet location was designed to help trafficking survivors recover in peace. As he entered, a counselor greeted him warmly. "They've been asking about you," she said. "They'll be glad to see you." James found the twins in a small sitting room, curled up together on a couch. Their faces lit up when they saw him. "Officer Langston," the driver exclaimed, sitting up. James smiled and pulled up a chair. "How are you two holding up?" "We're okay," the passenger said softly. "But, have you stopped them yet?" James took a deep breath. "We're getting closer. And you've already helped us so much. But I wanted to ask if you remember anything else, other houses, people, anything that could help us find more victims." The driver looked at her sister, then back at James. "There was a warehouse," she said slowly. "They took us there once. It smelled like gasoline and something sweet, like chemicals." The passenger nodded. "There were big metal doors. And I remember hearing trains. It must have been near tracks." James jotted down their descriptions. "That's really helpful," he said. "You're both incredibly brave." With the twins' information, Laura's team pinpointed a location near an industrial area with train tracks, a warehouse that matched their description. The decision was made to raid the site that night, with James and Laura leading the operation. "This could be the key to shutting them down for good," Laura told James as they suited up. "If we're right, this is their main hub." James nodded, his resolve firm. "Let's end this." As night fell, the tactical team surrounded the warehouse, their movements swift and silent. James and Laura stood at the forefront, their weapons ready. The building loomed large and foreboding, its exterior dark except for a faint light seeping through the cracks in the metal doors. At Laura's signal, the team breached the doors. The interior was vast, filled with crates, machinery, and the unmistakable stench of chemicals. Several men inside froze in shock before attempting to flee, but the officers quickly subdued them. "Clear the area," Laura commanded. "Look for evidence and any signs of victims." In a corner of the warehouse, James found a hidden room secured with a padlock. With the help of a crowbar, he forced the door open. Inside were 3 teenagers, their faces pale and frightened. "It's okay," James said gently, lowering his weapon. "We're the police. You're safe now." One of the teens, a girl about 15, stepped forward cautiously. Are they gone?" "They're gone," James assured her. "You're safe." As the rescued teens were escorted out and the suspects were handcuffed, James and Laura surveyed the scene. The warehouse was filled with evidence, ledgers, communication devices, and even vehicles modified for transport. "This is it," Laura said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. This is the heart of their operation. James nodded. The twins were right. Their courage led us here. After the raid, James returned to the safe house to update the twins. He found them in their room, anxiously waiting for news. We did it, he told them. We found the warehouse, and we've shut it down. More kids are safe because of you. The driver's eyes filled with tears. So, it's over. Almost, James said. There's still work to do, but the people who hurt you won't be able to hurt anyone else. The twins hugged each other tightly, their relief evident. Thank you, the passenger whispered. For believing us. James smiled. You believed in yourselves first. That's what matters. The sun was rising as Officer James Langston stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the last few weeks finally beginning to lift. The raid on the warehouse had been a success. The trafficking ring was dismantled, its leaders arrested, and countless victims rescued. But today was about something more, closure for the twins who had bravely shared their story and guided the police to this victory. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. The traffickers arrested during the operations were appearing before a judge, their crimes laid bare for all to hear. The twins, accompanied by their counselor, sat quietly in the gallery, their hands tightly clasped. James entered and took a seat nearby, offering them a reassuring nod. He could see the nervousness in their eyes but also a spark of determination. This was their moment to face the people who had caused them so much pain and reclaim their power. When it was time for the twins to testify, the courtroom fell silent. The driver was the first to take the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but as she recounted their ordeal, she grew stronger, her words filled with courage and resolve. They told us we had no one, she said, her eyes fixed on the traffickers. That no one would come for us. But they were wrong. Someone did come for us. Her sister followed, echoing the sentiment. We were scared, but we knew we had to get out. We had to try. And because of Officer Langston and everyone who believed us, we're here today. James felt a lump in his throat as he listened. Their bravery was extraordinary, and he couldn't have been prouder of them. The evidence against the traffickers was overwhelming, thanks to the twins' testimony and the materials recovered from the raids. The judge delivered a harsh sentence, ensuring the perpetrators would spend decades behind bars. As the verdict was read, a wave of relief washed over the courtroom. The twins exchanged a tearful hug, their counselor smiling through her own tears. Justice had been served. After the trial, James stepped outside with the twins. The morning air was cool and refreshing, a stark contrast to the emotional intensity of the courtroom. The driver turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she said softly. We wouldn't be here without you. James knelt to meet their gaze. You two are the bravest people I've ever met, he said. You gave us the information we needed to stop them. You saved lives. The passenger hesitated, then asked, what happens to us now? James had been thinking about this moment for weeks. He had seen too many children like them lost in the foster system, and he couldn't bear the thought of it happening to them. After discussing it with his wife, he had made a decision that would change all their lives. I'd like to offer you a home, he said, his voice steady. If you'll let me, I want to adopt you both. The twins stared at him, their expressions shifting from shock to joy. Tears welled in their eyes as they nodded, their smiles brighter than James had ever seen. Really? The driver whispered. You mean it? James smiled. I've never been more sure of anything. The adoption process was expedited due to the circumstances, and within weeks, the twins officially became part of James's family. On the day the paperwork was finalized, they stood together in front of the courthouse, their smiles captured in a photo that James would treasure forever. At home, James and his wife worked to create a space where the twins could heal and grow. They painted their rooms in their favorite colors, filled the house with books, games, and warmth, and slowly built the foundation of trust and love. Months later, the twins had started school, joined clubs, and begun to find a sense of normalcy. Their laughter filled the house, a sound that James cherished every day. As he watched them thrive, James knew that the journey hadn't just changed their lives, it had changed his as well. Their courage had inspired him, and their resilience had reminded him why he had chosen to serve and protect. The case had also set a precedent for future trafficking investigations, with new protocols inspired by the twins' bravery. The operation dismantled an entire network, saving countless lives and sparking a renewed focus on combating human trafficking. For James, the legacy of the twins' courage was more than professional, it was deeply personal. They had become his daughters, and together they had forged a bond stronger than anything he had ever known. As James stood in the kitchen one evening, watching the twins bake cookies and laugh together, he felt a deep sense of peace. The nightmares they had endured were behind them, and the future stretched out before them, bright and full of possibilities. "You're home now," James said quietly, more to himself than to them. "And nothing will ever take that away." This story reminds us of the incredible strength and courage that can shine even in the darkest situations. The twins' bravery and Officer Langston's unwavering dedication to protecting them not only saved lives but dismantled an entire operation, ensuring no one else would endure the same nightmare. It's a powerful testament to the importance of never giving up hope and the profound impact of compassion and action. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt and inspiring tales. We'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What part of this story resonated with you the most? Thank you for watching and being part of our community.